Without action, you have no character. I think about those words a lot. While true for all storytelling mediums, for no medium is this more true than video games. Action is essential for video games to exist. From Townscaper to Mass Effect, action is at the core of every game. Because video games, unlike film and TV, do not have a passive audience, but an active participant, an actor to play the main character. Video games have the player, and a player needs mechanics like an actor needs a script. Hello, I'm Gator Soup. For those who are just finding me now, I'm an indie game developer with a history of making 2D puzzle games, and I'm working on Occultation, a 3D horror hack and slash game. And a little over a month ago, well, okay, a lot over a month ago, I published my first devlog, where I talked about setting up some of the early components of the project, and for the last month and a half-ish, I have been hard at work building out several core mechanics and systems that will define combat and the player character. This devlog is mostly focused on work that was done in July and early August, with a few exceptions. I worked on lots of small things during this period, however most of my time and effort was focused on 3 areas: the mana system, blocking and parrying, and the scoring system. So let's get into it. Up first, mana systems. Mana systems are nothing new and have been present in video games for decades across many genres. The idea is simple. You fill up a bar by collecting potions or some other resource and then spend said resource on powerful spells. In character action games, they take on a bit of a different flavor, but ultimately accomplish the same task. You build up the mana resource over time or via combat, and then spend the resource to activate an ability, special attack, or some sort of alternative power state. In Devil May Cry, it's called the Devil Trigger, and when you use it, you go into Devil mode. In Bayonetta, it's called the Magic Gauge, and you use it to power whatever this is. In Occultation, it's called Radiance, and the player uses it to build up points by landing attacks so that they can use more powerful attacks. Basically, the most generic version of this system, right? Wrong. While Radiance appears rather similar to existing mana systems, it actually deviates in 2 significant ways. First, much like in other mana systems and character action games, every time you land a hit, you do get points. However, unlike most other mana systems, there are actually 2 ways to use these points: a passive way and an active way. The passive way is to store up radiance points. As you store the points, you unlock stat and effect bonuses for your attacks that dynamically change. Essentially, as you do well in combat and store points, your strengths and weaknesses will change. The active way is far more traditional. As the player builds up radiance, they have the option to spend the points to use special attacks. Together, these 2 mechanics create the first unique part of the Radiance system, and really emphasize a risk versus reward mindset where the player must decide when to risk their stat and effect bonuses for powerful but costly special attacks. So let's break them down. In the passive way, the stat and effect bonuses are called buffs. Right now, the buffs are purely superficial and use weapon trails to denote which one the player has active, but down the road they will include numeric changes to the attacks as well as other special effects. I plan to allow the player to assign and customize their buffs and the order in which they occur, but I haven't really started on that yet. Initially, I had planned to do a dynamic combat system where as you gained radiance, your attacks would change and use new animations, but I'm ultimately a solo dev and that amount of animation work sounded like a Sisyphean task. I believe that the buffs and the ability to customize the buffs will accomplish the same task of making combat very dynamic while also making it more flexible and expressive. So those are the basics of the buffs, but how do they become active and when do the buffs change? Well, that's where tiers come in. Now, the sharp-eyed amongst you may have already noticed it, but if you look at the radiance bar in the upper left, you'll realize that it is actually 3 bars. These bars are the tiers. Each tier is about 100 radiance points. When one is filled, the spillover goes into the next one. Each of these tiers denotes which of the buffs are actively affecting the player. Fill up a tier and the buff will come into effect and change your attacks. Fill up the next tier and the active buff will change. And that's it for the passive part of the Radiance system. So let's briefly talk about the active part. As the player builds up Radiance, they have the option to spend the points to use special attacks similar to those found in Bayonetta and other games. And before you ask, yes, the special attacks will also be affected by the buffs. Right now, I have a single special attack, but it has been a good way to test the idea, and I really like what it's adding to combat. The special attacks end up feeling like flashy finishers because of how they work. You see, because special attacks cost Radiance, there's an incentive to use them when optimally positioned to maximize their effects and hopefully fully recoup the Radiance cost. In essence, the addition of these costly attacks adds a nice give and take to the radiance system. And to fully explain and understand this give and take, we need to talk about how radiance is earned. In Occultation, there are two ways to get radiance during combat: from hitting and from vanquishing. Why the distinction? Well, in Occultation, the player receives a small amount of radiance instantaneously for landing hits. That's pretty simple and it doesn't need much more explanation. In contrast, when the player vanquishes an enemy, that enemy drops radiance orbs that the player can pick up to earn more significant amounts of radiance. Right now, the orbs are just placeholder, but I did have a lot of fun tinkering with the drop amounts. There's actually a surprisingly large amount of work that goes into these radiance drops, far more than I have time to explain right now, so I will just say this. The radiance drops are determined by the nature of the attack that resulted in the kill. If an enemy was defeated via special attack that cost radiance points to execute, then the player will receive a significant amount of radiance points as a reward. As a result, there's an incentive to weaken a large group of enemies and then use special attacks to finish off as many as possible, earning a significant amount of radiance in return. Now, this concept of storing points to make your attacks stronger and then spending those points for even stronger attacks probably sounds wildly overpowered. But don't worry, it's by design, because there's a twisted catch to this system, the second element that makes the radiance system unique. Are you ready? The radiance bar is always depleting at a set rate during combat. That's right, the player is actively losing radiance points in combat anytime they're not actually attacking. So why would I add this? Well, the answer is incredibly simple: urgency. Occultation is ultimately a horror hack and slash game. That means there has to be some sort of pressure on the player. The fact that the radiance resource is always depleting means that the player must stay active, fighting disempowerment in a very literal sense. The player can never rest on their laurels or wait and see. They need to find new lines of attack that will constantly allow them to survive and create more wiggle room. This dichotomy between storing points for strong overall attacks versus using points to unleash devastating moves, knowing that if you're not careful and efficient, you will become weaker, is a really intriguing wrinkle that I think will lead to some cool choices for the player. I've often heard it said that good game design is about providing players with interesting choices. And while I don't dare to presume that this is a piece of good game design, I do feel like it is the first step towards something interesting and exciting. I can't wait to see how it turns out, and I hope to get active playtesting of this system from friends pretty soon so that I can see it in action. In the meantime, I would love to hear your thoughts on the radiance system and how it's turning out. What do you think of this constant depletion effect? For now though, let's move on. Given the major shift in the combat style due to the radiance system, a large amount of my effort since the last devlog has been focused on the block and parry mechanics. You see, blocking is a bit of an oddity in character action games. It's a very useful safety net for the player, but oftentimes, especially in such fast-paced, combo-centric games, blocking can become a lethal momentum killer. Hell, Devil May Cry skipped it altogether and just made parrying something the player does via attacking. So why am I talking about this? Well, the changes created by the radiance system kinda magnified the momentum killer issues with blocking. Thus, I've been reworking these mechanics to better fit with the radiance system and the momentum and feel of combat. I have big plans, but so much of it is still actively being changed that I'm thinking it'll probably be its own video when I've solidified all of the disparate parts. For now though, what you need to know for this devlog is that blocking now costs radiance and that the parry has been changed slightly to include a parry bonus. The reason I decided to add a cost to the block is to disincentivize hiding behind your shield and relying too much on the parry. This isn't a Soulsborne game, it's a hack and slash game. The emphasis is on building up momentum in combat and attacking constantly. Making a block cost something forces the player to only use it when they've earned it and when they can benefit from it or save themselves. Because blocking now has a risk, there arose a need for more of a reward, and that is why I've also added the parry bonus. If the player lands a successful parry, they get a timed boost that affects how much radiance they earn, how much damage they do, and how much score they get. And honestly, that's all you need to know right now. I promise this area is undergoing massive changes, and I think you will all really like what's to come for these mechanics, but I think for now we need to move on to the final section of this devlog. That's right, The last major system I worked on was a scoring system. Now, if you're a fan of character action games like me, this is probably not a big surprise, given how prominent score and rank systems have been in the genre. However, it was not a given that I would actually include a score and rank system, and I actively debated its pros and cons and whether it added anything essential to the game. Don't get me wrong, I love score systems. I love the energy they foster and how they promote replayability and the mastery of mechanics. But I'm not just making a hack and slash game, I'm also making a horror game, and score points taking up is not a mechanic that we think of when dealing with horror, because fundamentally, scoring points and numbers ticking up makes us feel powerful. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that scoring systems are so deeply attached to our notions of feeling powerful and successful that they are also perfect and primed for subversion that makes us scared at specific moments. The best example of this is Batman Arkham Asylum, which has a simple scoring system focused on hits, but that makes you feel really powerful. You see, when in combat, the player feels like Batman. They feel strong, and all the feedback affirms that, especially as the hit counter climbs up. However, flash forward to a Scarecrow section or a Croc section, and the tone is completely different. It's genuinely scary, because here in these sections, a high hit count means nothing. You can't beat these enemies by hitting them a lot, and that subversion is exactly what I want for Occultation, and it is all the reassurance that I needed to know that this is the right path. So I decided to add a scoring system, but the question became what type. In the realm of character action games, there are quite a few different styles and systems of scoring, and pretty much every game handles it in its own unique way, but there are some ways to categorize them. The easiest way is as complex scoring systems and simple scoring systems. The complex systems include the Devil May Cry games, Bayonetta, Hi-Fi Rush, and so on, and they feature robust scoring systems in combat that focus on skill and mastery of an entire moveset to achieve high marks at the end of each level. In contrast, the simple systems include the likes of God of War, the early Darksiders games, and Batman Arkham Asylum. Their focus is less on complex scoring systems and ranks, and more on maximizing the number of hits to get the most experience points out of a fight. Side note, Arkham Asylum is actually a stealth brawler hybrid, not a hack and slash game. However, the two genres are close relatives, so I'm including it anyway. I personally like the robust mastery-focused systems of Devil May Cry, but I also like the hit-centric focus of games like God of War and Batman Arkham Asylum. So basically, I like Bayonetta. All jokes aside, I decided to pursue a decently complex system, and to start, I opted to focus where most of the points are being doled out, during combat. Now, to be perfectly honest, part of the reason this video took so long to make is because I have struggled to find a good way to summarize the combat scoring system in a way that doesn't leave you looking like this chihuahua. So here goes. This is the combat score equation. Actually, it's a simplified version of the equation, but it's the one we're going to use. At the simplest level, every time the player attacks and lands a hit, they get points. But the amount of points is determined by this equation. So let's break it down. You have the initial points, the repeat penalty, the attack rank bonus, the frequency curve multiplier, the hit counter multiplier, and finally the parry bonus and kill bonus. But those two are only calculated in the context where they actually apply. The initial points are pretty easy to explain. They are the base points that are given when a hit has been landed. The repeat penalty is probably one of the most significant yet simplest parts of this equation. It removes half of the initial points if the hit that landed was the result of reusing the same attack, i.e. spam. When a hit is landed, the rank of the attack is used to determine the additional points added to the score. Low ranks result in smaller bonuses, and high ranks result in larger bonuses. The frequency curve multiplier might sound similar to the repeat penalty in name, however, its function is far more positive. Basically, the player gets a score multiplier based on how infrequently they have used an attack in a single hit chain. The player is rewarded for using the majority of their toolset rather than relying on a few attacks over and over again. Now, while this might sound super interesting, it's actually a pretty common feature. So let's move on. Up next is the hit counter multiplier. Now, I'm sure there's a better name for it, but alas, one escapes me. The hit counter is really simple. It's a counter that goes up every time the player lands a hit. If the chain is broken, either by a timeout or by the player taking damage, then the counter resets to 0. Keep the hit counter climbing long enough and the player will receive score multipliers for each past milestone. And finally, that leaves us with the last two items, the parry bonus and the vanquish bonus. Both are pretty straightforward. With the parry bonus, when the player lands a successful parry, they get a temporary buff to any points earned for a short period of time. The vanquish bonus is even simpler. When the player lands a kill, they get a guaranteed number of points added to their score. That's it. Now, while this combat scoring system will eventually play into larger level scores, believe it or not, high ranks are not the sole purpose of a scoring system. In many ways, while scoring systems are used to gauge the player's skill, they are also used to provide rewards. In the case of Occultation, getting a high score increases the radiance drops from kills, and down the road will include other elements. And I think that's enough score talk for right now. The objective of this system is to be easy enough to pick up, but flexible enough that the experienced player is rewarded for using the full breadth of the combat tools at their disposal, and I think this is a good start in that direction. Ultimately, time and playtesting will tell, but we're not there yet. And that's it for this devlog. The radiance system, blocking, the scoring system. Each of these areas will end up having an enormous effect on how the player plays as the main character and how they interact with the game as a whole. As such, for me, it's incredibly important to hammer out these mechanics and systems now and not later. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you enjoyed the devlog. Please feel free to leave comments and feedback on the game or the videos, as I'm still pretty new at this. I've really enjoyed making and sharing them, and I'm finding them incredibly cathartic. I can't wait to show what's next for the game, and I promise it won't take another 4 months. If you want to follow along and see more regular updates, please subscribe, join the Discord, or support me on Patreon, where I'll be making regular posts, sharing concept art, and other content that did not make the cuts for these devlogs. Until the next devlog, goodbye for now, have a wonderful day, and toodles.